Please subscribe, like and share our videos. Exclusive content brought to you here on Latif Yahia's channel only. Latif Yahia has asserted his rights under the Copyright, Designs, and Patents Act, 1988 to be identified as the author of this work. This book is sold subject to the condition that it shall not, by way of trade or otherwise, be left, resold, hired out, or otherwise circulated without the author's prior consent in any form of binding or cover other than that in which it is published and without a similar condition including this condition being imposed on the subsequent purchaser. Chapter 10. A Death at a Party. I'm haunted by my failure to stop the atrocities I'm witnessing. But what could I do? Uday's bodyguards are constantly by his side and almost seem to derive as much pleasure from Uday's acts of cruelty as their boss does. If I'd expressed a word of disapproval, let alone intervened to stop him, I'd be executed on the spot. And more than likely my family would be soon after. As usual, the woman's desperate suicide and her husband's imprisonment are instantly forgotten except for the occasional sick comment. Why did he have to insult the president? His wife wasn't worth it. These really upset me. I imagine one day I'll snap and they'll be making similar jokes about my grisly end. What is a human life worth in this hierarchy? Nothing. What would happen if I had a wife Uday took a fancy to? Would I be as willing to die for her as that captain had for his wife? Following our return from Al-Hapaniya, Uday is noticeably subdued. His expeditions through Baghdad are reduced to only 2 or 3 a week. I doubt he has a guilty conscience, so put it down to some survival instinct that's encouraging him to keep his head down and out of the firing line. Too many people witnessed what happened at the Al-Madinah Hotel for it to be hushed up. And stories like that have a domino effect. If they're lined up, it only takes a small touch to bring the whole lot crashing down. Nevertheless, I'm sure Sadam Hussein never heard about what his son got up to in one of his favorite tourist resorts. The newspapers just carried a small report that an Iraqi army officer had been imprisoned for insulting our president. Uday seems to be concentrating more intensely than he usually does on his newspapers and many other business interests in Baghdad. He has several meetings with Al-Hajj Khalid al-Qabisi. Al-Qabisi is a close friend of Uday's and oversees all imports from Jordan. His management office is near the Al-Sat restaurant. Not that it matters where it is, as Uday always avoids having discussions or negotiations in his business partners' offices. He's afraid of hidden bugs and video cameras. His philosophy is: never negotiate anywhere your business partner has chosen. Mistrust everything, question everything. Even friends can be cheats and blackmailers. Well, it takes one to know one. Uday holds most of his business meetings in his own office at the Olympic Club. It's packed full of the latest surveillance equipment and, on his home ground, Uday can intimidate his business partners to agree to what he wants. Uday has an interest in just about every international hotel in Baghdad. He controls all their imports from abroad. But his biggest influence on the economy is through food production. He owns farms in all the most fertile regions of the country. These aren't just normal farms. They're agricultural industrial plants with the latest technical equipment and were set up on the American model. They only use the best high-performance products, such as a special kind of grain that produces 3 times the yield of the seeds used by ordinary Iraqi farmers. Uday's farms are managed by Afif and Yaoudant, who both studied high-intensity agriculture in the United States. Bakr al-Abdullah is in charge of the enormous herds of cattle and sheep. All farms are united in a kind of cooperative. Ordinary farmers must deliver all the products of their labor to Uday's farms, where they are guaranteed to sell them, though at a rock-bottom prices. In return, they have to buy all their seeds, fertilizer and farm machinery from Uday. This system ensures Uday's agricultural mafia control everything. The farmer's produce is sold on in Baghdad at 10 times what the farmers were paid. A condition of every deal is that the middlemen are obliged to take certain quantities from Uday's farms, all at the highest possible price as befits the superior quality farms run by the president's son would naturally produces. It means Uday makes a handsome return from every egg, every piece of meat and every grain of corn. It's the perfect money-making machine. It also means when the foodstuff is sold on to shops and caterers, the price is much higher than it need be when it goes into Iraqi mouths. The colossal income from this business is administered by Uday's financial advisors Madhat and Salhan al-Shahbandar. These men transfer vast amounts to Uday's bank accounts in Switzerland. There are only two people who can access these accounts. The first is Uday himself and the other is his uncle, Barzan al-Tikriti, who also administers Saddam Hussein's vast fortune that's squirreled away abroad. It's a tight meshed net of corruption in which everyone has his own fixed price. But this seemingly cozy arrangement had an unexpected and dramatic repercussion. The financial side of the Saddam Empire is run by Salhan al-Shahbandar, who is married to an ophthalmologist called Samira, a very attractive, successful and Western-orientated young woman. She created a scandal that everyone in Saddam's inner circle found out about. During the course of her husband's work, Samira was introduced to the president. According to rumors, their initial conversation sparked an affair that became a genuine crisis within the family. The president was smitten and pursued the ophthalmologist for weeks. He showered her with jewelry, cars, clothes and perfumes. The uncharacteristic behavior is more suited to a besotted schoolboy than the heartless, cruel dictator everyone knows him to be. Most women in Iraq see Saddam Hussein as a handsome, attractive, fascinating man. He's powerful, strong, dangerous, brutal and unscrupulous. All characteristics that would be repellent in normal circumstances, but in Saddam Hussein they act as a magical aphrodisiac. The ladies of Baghdad high society trip over themselves for a private audience with their president. His office has to deal with endless requests for the honor of meeting him. A photograph taken with Saddam has more status than any other possession. During the war with Iran, Saddam even used his popularity to head a campaign to persuade the population to give up their valuables to bolster Iraq's dwindling finances. Every evening, Iraqi television showed elegantly dressed ladies calling on the palace to present Saddam with their rings, necklaces, jewels and other valuable family heirlooms. This cunning scheme put all of Baghdad's richest women under pressure of repercussions if they didn't pander to the president's request, and many tried to give more than their society rivals to uphold their status. But it was generally their desire to be seen with their leader, and appear on television with him that appealed to their vanity. Saddam Hussein kissed the women's hands, flattered them with his considerable charm and wooed them with his personal charisma. Dr. Samira reacted very differently to him. She was coy, acted the faithful wife and refused him for a while. Whether Samira intended to or not, her actions made Saddam even more keen. Virtually every day, he sent his close friend and personal food taster, Kamal Hanna, to her practice with presents. He bombarded her with gifts, flattered her with compliments. The contrast in Saddam couldn't have been greater. On one hand he was a murdering despot, on the other he was a love-struck charmer. After weeks of wooing, his persistence was rewarded and Samira accepted an invitation from Saddam. They met in one of his 83 palaces. Whatever happened between them that night, it continued to happen. For over 6 months, the president was able to keep their relationship secret. Kamal Hanna was instrumental in this. He kept everything from Saddam's wife, Sajida, just as he had before when the president had a long-term affair with Najida, the tennis player and wife of the Minister of Culture and Media, Hamad Yusuf Hamidi. On that occasion, Saddam had wanted to leave his wife for Najida but had somehow been persuaded to end the romance and concentrate on affairs of state. This time Saddam was completely infatuated. He married Samira in secret, taking her as his second wife. Only Kamal Hanna and Samira's first husband knew about it. It was only when Samira got pregnant and gave birth to a son that the first rumors started to circulate and reached the ears of Saddam's long-term first wife, Sajida. Sajida had always been a loyal, steady character in Saddam's family life, although she also had a tendency for extravagant eccentricity. Like another dictator's wife, Imelda Marcos, she loves shopping more than anything else. She's virtually addicted to it. Every month, she jets around Europe with her fashion advisors to stock up on the latest designer creations from Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, and Chanel. Obviously, actually visiting their exclusive stores is well beneath the dignity of such an important patron, and so they fly to Geneva and present their collections to Sajida in her hotel suites. In one respect, Sajida even outdoes the clothing fetishes of her husband and eldest son. She changes her clothes almost every hour. When she's bored, she amuses herself by getting her ladies-in-waiting to drape her with jewelry and then flits through the palace, twirling around in front of the huge Baroque mirrors. Only one thought troubles her sleep at night. How can she acquire even more fabulous jewelry? At the rare party she attends, her jewelry outsparkles the chandeliers and bedazzles the other guests. It's always the major talking point. She'll happily chat away about where she bought which ring or in which city she acquired her earrings. She personifies Iraq's wealth even more than Uday. Like her husband and sons, she has her own bodyguards and secret police employed to protect her and guard her precious jewelry. Like Uday, she uses her bodyguards as serfs. Most commendably, she once tried to be an ordinary housewife and planted some tomato seedlings in her palace garden. Unfortunately, the place she chose was in the hot, blazing sun. A few days later, the plants wilted and died. Sajida had 6 of her bodyguards, who she'd instructed to water the seedlings, whipped and thrown into prison for 10 days. When Sajida heard of Saddam's second marriage, she immediately told her father, Karala Tulfa, who Saddam had appointed governor of Baghdad. That opened a can of worms which was to damage even the seemingly impregnable Saddam clan. Karala wasn't a man to keep a dignified silence. He publicly criticized the behavior of his son-in-law, whom he had brought up as his own son. He advised Sajida to move out of the palace in protest. One can only imagine Saddam's fury when she snubbed her husband and did just that, moving to a feudal villa in the presidential grounds conveniently close to her daughters Ragd, Rina and Hala's villas. When news of all this reaches Uday, he's beside himself with rage at what his father's done to his beloved mother. He was always his mother's favorite child. From his earliest years, she covered up his bad behavior, protected him against his father's anger and forgave him anything. And now this. Illogically, Uday's fury wasn't directed at his father but at his father's friend and food taster, Kamal Hanna. He's the one who's always got women and girls for my father. If only he hadn't dragged that whore into the palace. If only he'd killed her afterwards like all the others, he rages at every opportunity. After he tired of them, Saddam had most of his mistresses killed rather than risk them talking about him. This was the responsibility of Kamal Hanna and his henchmen. The presidential X's were run over, cast in concrete and sunk to the bottom of the Dela River, which is to the east of the palace. Once, I was unlucky enough to witness such cruel murders. Our convoy, which included Uday, was heading for Project Number 7 when we saw the bizarre spectacle of Kamal Hanna's men driving in limousines chasing after a group of women running for their lives. To my horror, they knocked the women down and then reversed back over their bodies. They drove over them a number of times to make sure they were dead and then dragged the corpses to one of the slipways connecting the palace with the steamships on the Dela River. Uday pulled up and briefly spoke to Kamal Hanna. They were my father's whores, Uday told me later. There was a consequence to Sajida's dramatic move. A defiant Saddam moved Samira and her son into a side wing of the palace. Saddam calls this particular palace Project 2000. The building was designed by an Austrian architect and the construction work, which cost $500 million, was carried out by French firms. It was a terrible scandal that Saddam was now living under the same roof as Samira and heaped further humiliation on his original family. Uday took the slight far worse than the others. I have grown to know Uday very well by now. Every day I have to dress as he does, I have to change when he changes and have my hair cut when he has his cut. Having to adopt his external persona also gives me an insight into his inner self. I notice when he's happy. I sense when he's down. It isn't difficult, as Uday doesn't exactly keep his feelings to himself. He brags about his sexual conquests, talks non-stop about the guns he's fired at shooting clubs, laughs about the latest hotel guest he's had beaten up by his bodyguards. Uday is an open book I can read at will, even when he tries to be secretive. He's doing that now. It's noticeable that the family council is holding meetings with increasing regularity. Normally they're only held once a week, always in a different palace. Now there's one almost every day. For security reasons, they're arranged by phone just an hour before. Every time Uday returns from one of these meetings, he seems frustrated and simmering with rage. He's positively scathing of Kamal Hanna, brandishing him the spineless lickspittle who destroyed my mother. He's no less harsh in his criticism of Farooq Abu Omar. He's regarded as Saddam Hussein's private pimp. He initially approaches the women and informs them of the honor about to be bestowed upon them before passing them on to Kamal Hanna, who makes the final arrangements. Uday never openly slates his father, but I notice he no longer wears his favorite wristwatch which has a portrait of Saddam on the face. Nor has he shouted in praise of his father recently. I remember one such incident at his birthday party. After the party became an orgy, Uday picked up a 25 dinar note off the floor. He set it on fire and shouted to all the couples having sex around him, "Do what you want, but always remember, if any one of you ever speaks ill of my father, I will burn you like this banknote." Uday has no qualms about anything or anyone apart from his family. Why should he? His father taught him that all rivals must be eliminated. Uday sees Samira as a rival to his mother. He can't eliminate her but Kamal Hanna. For weeks, Uday has no duties for me to perform on his behalf. This makes my life monotonous and extremely boring. Although Uday makes no public appearances, I'm continually given instructions about which suit I'm to wear the next day. This clothing rule also applies to Uday's bodyguards. Uday insists everyone around him is dressed to match him. This means that dressing and changing is a daily chore because Uday owns suits not just in every color but in every shade of color. And he often changes several times a day, so we have to as well. The absurdity of our everyday life tends to distract us from Uday's family problems. And the crisis seems to have blown over until the day it's announced that Saddam has given Kamal Hanna the task of organizing a party in the garden of a ministerial assembly. The date was set for early November 1988. Party invitations are sent out to ministers, leading Ba'ath Party members, the elite of Baghdad society. Even Suzanne Mubarak, the wife of the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, who's visiting Iraq, confirms she'll attend. Kamal Hanna has sent an invitation to Qusay but not his elder brother. When Uday finds out he's been snubbed, he reacts with his customary fury. He sees it as a provocative act by Kamal Hanna, who shows him a complete lack of respect. Not one to take an insult without retaliating, Uday spends days plotting a plan of action to shake off this ignominy. Together with his own master of ceremonies, Namir al-Tikriti, they come up with what Uday thinks is a stroke of genius but in reality is the childish revenge of a spoiled brat. Uday will hold a rival party at the same time in a nearby part of the garden. He sets up massive marquees and the most powerful sound system that exists in Iraq. He briefs his chefs to prepare a buffet that will make Kamal Hanna's look like starvation rations. Everything at Uday's party must be bigger, better and louder. Invitations are sent out to all Uday's friends. He even insists all Baghdad's demimonde are there. "We need the most beautiful, attractive and interesting women in Baghdad," Uday instructs his pimps. Uday even invites me. The parties take place on a perfectly still, pleasantly warm night. At Uday's party, liveried staff are serving chilled champagne and canapés. The music from Kamal Hanna's party is hardly audible, though the two parties are only separated by low hedges. Uday has noted this and instructed Abdulakal and his musicians to only play low background music. Despite this, Uday is spoiling for a confrontation and all his guests can sense a tense atmosphere. Surprisingly, he seems to have enough self-control not to fire the opening shot, but the night is still young. We eat, sip our drinks, make small talk. The mood is subdued and quiet, not at all like Uday's normal parties, which are generally loud and vulgar from the first champagne cork popping. One thing is typical. Uday starts drinking spirits very early. Even before dinner he's drunk a few glasses of whiskey without diluting it with ice or water. To wash down his dinner, he didn't have wine like the rest of us but neat brandy. He isn't drinking for the taste of his favorite tipples, he's out to get drunk as quickly as possible. Kamal Hanna's party is the exact opposite. Everyone who's anyone in Iraqi politics is there and the mood is suitably refined and diplomatic. It appears all the guests are greatly enjoying themselves. Suzanne Mubarak has arrived, as has Qusay Saddam Hussein with his wife Zainab, a general's daughter. Qusay can be heard laughing. He doesn't have his brother's high-pitched giggle. His laugh is hearty and natural like Saddam's. Qusay is Saddam's second-born child, just 2 years younger than Uday. He was born in 1966. Unlike his elder brother, Qusay wasn't disruptive at school, nor did he strive to be the center of attention. True, he arrived in a convoy of limousines, but he was dropped off outside the school rather than come roaring through the playground in an open-top sports car as Uday did. And, although he also had bodyguards watching over him during lessons, he never used their presence to intimidate the teachers. In fact, during break times Qusay always struck me as very reticent and even embarrassed by Uday's noisy, loutish, exhibitionist behavior. He seemed introverted, intellectual and sensitive. Years later, he looked a peaceful, charming young man. In his understated British made-to-measure suits he was the opposite of his flashy brother. Uday was always a rebel and dressed accordingly. Our school uniform was a pair of dark trousers and a white short-sleeved shirt. Uday wore jeans and a t-shirt with a printed picture on it, which were so trendy in America at the time. He always had to be different. Qusay left school with very good qualifications, and in 1984 he began to study law and public administration at the University of Baghdad. For some reason, he wasn't as good a university student as he had been a pupil at school. He barely attended 15 or 20 lectures and sometimes left those after only half an hour or so. However, he didn't do this in the rude, carefree manner his brother had walked out of lessons at school. Qusay just got up and left quietly with his head raised and posture upright and straight. Qusay was always a dignified personality and had a charisma all of his own. He knew he was someone special but didn't have to prove it to anyone. You could sense it from his facial expressions, the way he used his hands, his quiet but authoritative way of speaking. The words he used were different from Uday, too. No swearing or bragging. He's a gentleman, although not one that anyone wanted to get too close to, not that they could even if they'd wanted to. Because Qusay couldn't bear sitting in the open lecture halls surrounded by sweating fellow students, he was allowed to study in the office of the then dean. Dr. Muhammad al-Duri was a slimy, contemptible careerist who took the opportunity to take Qusay under his wing. Whenever he encountered Qusay around the university, the dean would bow obsequiously. Qusay always nodded in acknowledgement and walked quickly on, keeping his eyes straight ahead. He was followed by his bodyguards, who usually numbered between 20 to 25. Like a faithful dog, the dean would follow Qusay and even personally opened the door to his office for him if Qusay was heading there. All the students used to talk about the fact that Qusay sat at the dean's desk, obliging the dean to stand while the president's son got on with his studies. Qusay even took his final examinations sat at the dean's desk rather than with the rest of the students in the main examination hall. Like Uday, Qusay had a clique of close friends. But unlike Uday, it consisted solely of sons and daughters of respected government ministers and high-ranking Ba'ath Party members. Young people from more lowly backgrounds had no chance of joining his select circle of acquaintances. Among Qusay's closest friends are Bassam Latif Nasif Yassam, the son of the Minister of Media and Culture. Sa'el Suhail, a general's son. Marwan Adnan Sharif, a minister's son. Ayad Saddam Gaydin, a minister's son. Ali Ghateb, the son of a Ba'ath Party officer. None of Qusay's friends achieved the 85% mark necessary to attend university in Iraq. But Qusay still arranged for his friends to be accepted. Qusay graduated with an excellent degree. Qusay Saddam Hussein was the best graduate of 1988, achieving 99.9 marks in his final exam. Saddam Hussein clearly paid more attention to Qusay than to Uday. He tried to encourage his younger son to achieve high goals and not slide into sleaze and scandal as Uday had done. Saddam married Qusay to Zainab, a daughter of General Mar Abd al-Rashid. He'd masterminded many great victories for Iraq during the war. He'd helped win the vital Battle of Tahrir Alfan. After the war, he was celebrated as a glorious war hero with good reason. Saddam Hussein values General Mar Abd al-Rashid. He knows he needs military commanders with proven talent to win battles. The president also needs the general's loyalty, and the highly respected, scandal-free al-Rashid family is of greater value to Qusay than any education. Just 9 months after Qusay's and Zainab's wedding, their daughter Zaina is born. Following the amazingly successful completion of his studies, Qusay is appointed president of the Iraqi Writing Club. Far more importantly, he's also made head of the Secret Service and deputy head of Al-Qas. This is a real slap in the face to elder brother Uday. All through my months of training as Uday's fiday, I've only seen Qusay once. It tells me the brothers don't have a very close relationship. Unlike me, Qusay's fiday is a member of his immediate family. He's a distant cousin who looks deceptively like Qusay. I've no idea whether this distant cousin went through the same type of training as I had to endure, but it would certainly have been less fraught due to Qusay's milder nature. Qusay and his wife leave Kamal Hanna's party just before midnight. Uday's bodyguards watch them drive off and report back. By now Uday is completely drunk. He's past caring whether he disrupts Kamal Hanna's party or not. He orders Abdulakal to turn the music right up. Saddam arrives at the scene surprisingly quickly. He's wearing trousers, his shirt is unbuttoned. He's wearing shoes but no socks. It looks like he's got dressed in a hurry. Saddam looks shocked. He runs over to Kamal Hanna, bends over his friend's body and shouts, "Where is the doctor?" An ambulance pulls up. The ambulance crew hastily place Kamal Hanna onto a stretcher but quickly realize the man is already dead. Saddam refuses to accept his friend can't be saved. He orders the medics to hurry. They load Kamal Hanna's body into the ambulance and Saddam even travels in it to the Ibn Sina, Saddam's private hospital. It's a completely pointless trip. No one could have survived Uday's ferocious attack. It's not until the following day that I learn what else happened that night. Azam, Uday's first bodyguard, says Uday, who had become a murderer in everyone's eyes, tried to take his own life with tablets. Rather ironically, he'd ordered his bodyguards, the men whose duty it was to protect him, to bring him the tablets. He took a whole bottle of sleeping tablets, says Azam. When Uday ended up writhing on the floor, Azam and the other bodyguards took him to the Ibn Sina hospital. According to Azam, Uday stammered, "Don't tell my father, I want to die." Azam didn't dare disobey even a dying Uday, but the doctors informed Saddam that his son was also being admitted. Saddam stormed into Uday's room just as the doctors were about to insert a plastic tube down his throat to pump out his stomach. Uday vomits and retches, a picture of misery that you'd think would create instant pity in any father. But Saddam isn't any father. He grabs the tube from the doctors, pushes them aside and slaps his son twice across the face. As he does so, he yells, "Your blood will flow as my friends did." So the gruesome cold-blooded murder of his close friend is too much even for Saddam to accept. Uday isn't discharged from the hospital for several days. No statement explaining Kamal Hanna's murder is released by the presidential palace to the public. There isn't a single line about it in the papers. But the guests who witnessed it spread the story like wildfire around Baghdad. Within the palace, it's argued that the murder was the action of a perfectly normal, unstable, short-tempered and uncontrolled man. Uday has always been guided by his aggressive emotions. We all know that this contradictory yet still damning excuse is just an attempt to play matters down. Even the palace knows it. Uday has always been an animal, a sadist who thrived on violence and killing. But this murder of an adversary was more than just working off a sudden rage. In reality, Uday was carrying out a direct instruction from his mother. "I want Kamal Hanna, that procurer, to be destroyed." Sajida had told her son on a number of occasions. Without doubt, she hadn't intended her words to be taken as a direct order, but by uttering her wish she had provoked her son, whom she loved and revered, to distraction, and who reciprocated such high emotion back to her, to even greater fury and madness. 2 days after being released from hospital, Uday flew to Geneva with Yassim, his fashion advisor. Saddam was sending him to his uncle, Barzan al-Tikriti, as a punishment. The president made it public knowledge that Uday would face a court and pay for his crime, but, as scheming as ever, he used Uday's enforced absence to pile pressure on Kamal Hanna's family. As a result of this, Kamal Hanna's brother, who Uday also wanted to shoot at the party and who threatened to kill Uday, suddenly appears in public to request that Uday be treated leniently. His wish is granted and the charges against the president's son are discreetly dropped. But that isn't the end of the matter. The murder creates more friction within the presidential family. Until this point, the family had played an important role in maintaining control over the state institutions. For the good of Iraq, it was often a bigger priority that Saddam Hussein settled family politics than spend his time on economic matters. Saddam believed that the family has shaped social life in the Arabic-speaking world for centuries and followed this principle with his own. Political associations were strengthened by marriage and people who were key to the regime were usually personally connected to Saddam. So far that had been to both the clans and Saddam's advantage. But, after the murder of Kamal Hanna and Uday's departure for Geneva, the deep divisions within the Saddam clan became evident. What began with a presidential affair and Sajida moving out of the palace developed into a tragedy on the scale of Macbeth. Sajida, her father Kerala Tulfa and her brother Adnan Kerala all leveled accusations at Saddam and held him indirectly responsible for the murder of Kamal Hanna. Adnan Kerala was the most damning of them all. Adnan had been a friend of Saddam since childhood. They'd grown up together. If Saddam had a best friend, it was his cousin Adnan. When Saddam became president, he appointed Adnan defense minister. At the end of the war with Iran, he made him general chief of staff. Adnan is popular in Iraq. The people think of him as a war hero, a great general who cares about his soldiers. After the war, he came up with many ways of repatriating invalids back into society. Soldiers who were particularly brave were rewarded with plots of land, apartments and tax benefits. These social programs made Adnan Kerala a star, the darling of the masses. He was considered the second most important man in Baghdad after Saddam Hussein. That was his first mistake. But he was so popular he thought he was untouchable. That was his second mistake. Adnan's greatest error was to highlight the feud within Saddam's family to such a degree that it seemed like he wanted to disgrace or even topple the president. Adnan kept mentioning the scandal that Saddam had inflicted on his sister, Sajida. He found it monstrous that Samira had moved into the palace and forced Sajida to move out. He openly accused Saddam of destroying his family for the sake of his mistress. The robe came so bitter and heated that it could no longer be concealed from the bodyguards and palace staff. Sajida and her father boycotted further meetings. Sajida even instructed her bodyguards not to let Samira near her villa, although it was within the palace grounds where Samira lived. Adnan made a deliberate point of supporting his sister by visiting her very day. Saddam reacted to this in his usual forceful way. He sent Samira and their son, Ali, off to Europe. Then he delivered his first blow against his own family. His secret police raided all the businesses of his adopted father Kerala Tulfa. 17 of his managers were arrested and publicly accused of defrauding the Iraqi population of millions. Almost everyone in Baghdad knew that Saddam had been fully aware of such scams for years and had supported them. But Saddam was so wily he even had the audacity to appear on state television the day after the raids and praise Kerala Tulfa as an excellent businessman and politician. Saddam waited a few months before delivering his next deadly blow. He invited his whole family to accompany him on a trip to northern Iraq. Sajida, Qusay's wife, Zainab, Saddam's 3 daughters, Ragd, Hala, and Rina, Uday, who by now had returned from Geneva, Adnan Kerala and Ali Hassan al-Majid, known as Chemical Ali for his use of poison gas against the Kurds, made up this family gathering. They flew to northern Iraq in a number of helicopters. Saddam was in one of them. Sajida and his 3 daughters were in another. Uday and Qusay flew in their own private helicopters. Ali Hassan al-Majid and Adnan Kerala also had their own helicopters. The mass departure of the party from Baghdad was something of a public spectacle and was even broadcast on television. Just 24 hours later, the television carried another report. Saddam and his family were still in northern Iraq when it was announced that Defense Minister Adnan Kerala, who had had to return back to Baghdad early on urgent business, had flown into a sandstorm and crashed. Everyone on board, Adnan and his bodyguards, had perished. Saddam and his whole family attended Adnan Karala's funeral. Sajida had to be supported by her father, Karala Tulfa. All the women were in tears and even Saddam looked grave. He had reason to be. The funeral ended with an accusation leveled at him by Karala Tulfa. "You have destroyed my daughter's life and had my son murdered. For that I swear eternal revenge." Shortly afterwards, Karala Tulfa presented Baghdad society with his explanation of his son's helicopter crash and why he considered it not to be an unfortunate accident but a deliberate murder. 1. When Adnan Karala flew back to Baghdad, there was no sandstorm anywhere in Iraq. 2. There was no urgent business requiring Adnan to return to Baghdad. 3. He, Karala Tulfa, had received information that 4 explosive charges had been attached to his son's helicopter. 4. These explosive charges had been set by a Secret Service agent with the codename Karim. 5. Karim had been briefed on the assassination by Hussein Kamal, who was married to Sadam Hussein's eldest daughter, Ragged. 6. Ali Hassan al-Majid had been in charge of the whole operation. 7. Karim had left Iraq for Paris on an Iraqi Airways flight on the day of the assassination. Saddam didn't dispute the claims. He reacted with uncustomary silence. He went duck shooting with his bodyguards. Follow for the next chapter.